The morning sun hit the glass towers just right, the kind of glow that makes everything look cleaner, simpler, easier than it really is. I remember holding 2 paper bags of Thai takeout, balancing them like fragile proof of affection. Chris's favorite. I thought he'd smile, pull me close, say it was a nice surprise. Maybe I needed that reminder, that we were still us. My heels echoed across the marble floor as I stepped into the lobby, nodding at the receptionist. "Hi, I'm here to see Chris Turner. I'm his wife." She smiled, polite but distracted, as she picked up the phone to call upstairs. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee, sterile but comforting, like every office I'd ever worked in. I was still scanning the room when a bright, bubbly voice came from behind me. "Oh, so you're Mr. Turner's wife. Wow, you look so different from the woman who came yesterday." Just like that, the world tilted. My fingers tightened around the handles of the bag before I even processed the words. I turned to her, a young intern, maybe 22, eyes wide and innocent. "Sorry, what woman?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, soft. Her smile vanished. "Oh, maybe I misunderstood. She said she was Mrs. Turner, too. I'm so sorry." My face didn't move. I'd practiced that kind of stillness over years of marriage. "No problem," I told her. "Mistakes happen." But my stomach twisted as I stood there smiling. Someone else called herself Mrs. Turner, and everyone believed her. I waited for what felt like hours, though it was probably minutes. The receptionist smiled awkwardly, murmuring something about Chris being in a meeting. I nodded, pretending not to notice the glances exchanged between her and Sophie. The takeout bag was getting cold in my hands, and my heartbeat thudded in my ears louder than the clicking keyboards around me. When the elevator finally opened and Chris stepped out, I pasted on my best smile, the one that hides, not reveals. "Hey," he said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" I lifted the bag slightly. "Thought I'd bring you lunch. Thai, from that place you love." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. For a split second, he looked guilty. Then it vanished. He thanked me, kissed my cheek, and hurried me out of the building like a problem to be managed. The receptionist waved. Sophie looked pale. I smiled back as if nothing in the world had changed, but everything had. Driving home, the radio hummed with songs I didn't hear. My mind replayed Sophie's words, her nervous laughter, the way she said yesterday. Every detail pressed against my chest until breathing felt like an effort. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just gripped the steering wheel, feeling the plastic dig into my palms. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't crash in like a storm. It seeps in quietly, one innocent sentence at a time. When I got home, the takeout bag sat untouched on the counter, its scent filling the quiet kitchen. The same food that once meant comfort now felt tainted, like a reminder of something I hadn't fully lost yet, but would. I sat at the table, staring at the condensation on the containers, wondering how many lies fit between "I love you" and "I'm busy." The clock ticked too loudly. The walls seemed to listen. I told myself I was overreacting, but my gut, that old, inconvenient instinct, whispered otherwise. I thought back to the early years, when Chris would call just to say he missed me. Back then, I believed that kind of love was solid, dependable. Now it felt like a memory belonging to someone else. I replayed Sophie's face in my head, the nervous twitch, the quick apology, the look that said I said too much. A stranger had cracked open my life without even realizing it. And I couldn't decide whether to thank her or hate her for it. By evening, I'd rehearsed the moment 100 times, how I'd bring it up, what I'd say, how calm I'd sound. But beneath that calm, something new was forming. Not rage exactly, something colder, sharper, more deliberate. A quiet vow took shape inside me. I'd find out who she was, and when I did, I wouldn't just confront him. I'd make sure he understood what it felt like to be replaced. That night, I made dinner like nothing had happened. Salmon, roasted vegetables, a glass of white wine waiting for him, just the way he liked it. I set the table, lit a candle, and kept my expression steady as the front door opened. Chris walked in, his tie loosened, his face tired but strangely distracted. He kissed my cheek without really seeing me. While I plated the food, I could hear the faint clicks of his phone, the kind of silence that buzzes with secrets. "Busy day?" I asked, my tone light. He didn't even look up. "Exhausting. Meetings, clients, the usual chaos." His fork scraped against the plate, the sound sharp against the background hum of the TV. I tried again. "Anyone new at the office?" He shrugged, still scrolling. "Just a couple interns. Nothing worth mentioning." My chest tightened. He didn't realize the irony, that the person he wasn't mentioning was the only thing worth mentioning. He smiled faintly at something on his screen, the kind of smile I used to see when we were alone together. And that's when I said it, carefully, casually. "Someone mentioned your wife stopped by the office yesterday." His fork froze midair, just for a second, but I caught it. Then came the laugh, forced, thin. "What? That's ridiculous. You were at your mother's." I smiled back, every muscle rehearsed. "I know. That's what makes it strange." He chuckled again, trying to turn it into a joke, like so many uncomfortable truths we'd brushed aside before. "You and your imagination," he said, reaching for his wine. But his hand trembled slightly, and that tiny movement told me more than any confession ever could. I laughed too, a soft practice sound, and changed the subject. "That's the thing about lies. They crumble long before anyone admits to them. You just have to know where to look." After dinner, he claimed he had work to finish and disappeared into the shower. I watched the steam rise under the door while his phone sat face down on the counter. My pulse drummed in my ears. I'd never been the snooping type, but trust has a way of dissolving when curiosity starts to sting. I didn't go for his phone. Not yet. Instead, I opened his laptop. The familiar password still worked. Emails, spreadsheets, client meetings, and then, tucked among the dullness, something that wasn't routine. A calendar reminder. Lunch, Olivia, 12:30, Tuesday. The exact day the intern had mentioned. I stared at it, my reflection faint on the screen, feeling something inside me split cleanly in two. The woman who trusted him, and the one who no longer could. I closed the laptop, careful not to make a sound. Upstairs, the water kept running, drowning out every promise he'd ever made. When he came downstairs, hair damp and skin flushed from the shower, he smiled like nothing in the world had changed. Maybe for him, it hadn't. He poured another glass of wine, sat beside me on the couch, and talked about a new client, a deal he was excited about. I nodded in all the right places, pretending to listen while my mind replayed that single line on the calendar. Lunch, Olivia. It wasn't the name itself that hurt. It was the proof of intent, of planning. Affairs don't happen by accident. They're scheduled. I studied his face as he spoke, the same face I used to touch when I needed reassurance, when I believed we were on the same side. But now every feature felt foreign. The familiar turned unfamiliar, like a song I once loved but couldn't stand to hear anymore. He reached for my hand, absently, like muscle memory. I let him. Part of me wanted to pull away. Another part wanted to memorize this final version of us before everything changed. Later, when we went to bed, I stared at the ceiling long after he'd fallen asleep. His breathing was steady, peaceful, the sound of someone untroubled by conscience. I knew then that silence was my greatest weapon. I wouldn't confront him, not yet. Let him believe I was still in the dark, because soon I'd turn that darkness into light, and he wouldn't like what it revealed. The next morning, I woke up before Chris. The house was quiet except for the slow tick of the hallway clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. He looked peaceful in sleep, ironic, considering how restless my own night had been. I dressed in silence, slipped on a coat, and left before he even stirred. I wasn't running away, I was gathering truth. Because once you start seeing the cracks, you can't unsee them. You can only decide what to do with what falls through. I drove across town to see a friend of mine, Mia, who worked in another department of Chris's building. We hadn't talked in weeks, but when she saw my face, She knew. "Evelyn, what's wrong?" she asked softly as we sat in the cafe across from the office. The smell of burnt espresso hung heavy between us. "I just need to know something," I said, "and I need you to be honest." She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the window like she could hide the truth there. "About Chris?" I nodded, gripping the cup so tightly it burned my palms. "Someone said he was at the office with another woman, that she called herself Mrs. Turner." The words tasted bitter, like betrayal itself. Mia exhaled slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "Evelyn, I didn't want to get involved. But yes, they came in together last week, holding hands. She told security she was his wife." My throat tightened. I thanked her quietly, even smiled. But inside, something was rearranging, grief folding itself neatly into resolve. Driving home, I kept replaying Mia's words, the way her voice softened like she was trying to cushion the blow. Holding hands. That image looped in my mind. Chris's hand, the same one that once traced my back when I couldn't sleep, now holding someone else's like a promise. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, nails digging into the leather. There was a strange calm in the storm building inside me. The kind that comes right before you decide who you'll be next. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. Too much so. The curtains, the flowers by the sink, even his jacket on the chair. It was almost insulting how normal everything appeared. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in, feeling like a guest in my own life. I'd spent years making this house a home for us. Now it felt like a stage where I'd been performing someone else's script. That realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. I went upstairs and opened the closet. His shirts hung in a neat row, smelling faintly of cologne and deception. I ran my fingers across the fabric, stopping at one he'd worn that week. Then I caught my reflection in the mirror, still, composed, but different. Something had shifted in my eyes. I wasn't the woman who waited for explanations anymore. I was the woman who planned. And my plan had just started writing itself. That night I cooked dinner again, the way I always did. Steady hands, measured movements, no trace of the truth simmering inside me. Chris talked about work, about deadlines, about everything except her. I watched him carefully, memorizing every lie he didn't have to say out loud. Betrayal has a scent, metallic, like something burning just out of sight, and once you smell it, it never leaves you. After dinner, I stood at the sink washing dishes, staring out the window into the dark. I thought about Mia's face, her hesitant eyes, the way she'd said they came in holding hands. He hadn't just cheated on me, he'd erased me. He let another woman take my place, my name, my space in the world. And that, I realized, was unforgivable. The pain was still there, but it wasn't ruling me anymore. It was fueling me. When I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, he was already asleep, his breathing deep and even. I watched him for a long time, not with love, but with clarity. I'd been the faithful wife, the patient listener, the silent supporter. But that chapter was over. Tomorrow, I would start writing a new one where he'd finally understand what it feels like to lose control of the story. A week later, Chris mentioned the company dinner like it was nothing. Just another night of networking, shaking hands, charming clients. He didn't even ask if I wanted to come. He'd stopped asking long ago. That's how I knew it was the perfect stage. I smiled as he left that morning, pretending not to notice the crisp shirt he saved for special occasions. He still thought I was the same woman who packed lunches and kissed him goodbye. He hadn't realized that I'd already started planning his undoing. When the night came, I dressed slowly, deliberately. The mirror reflected someone I hadn't seen in years, composed, sharp, beautiful in the way that truth makes you beautiful. I chose a dress he once said made me look too intimidating. Perfect. I arrived at the restaurant uninvited, my heels striking marble like punctuation marks in a story I was finally rewriting. Heads turned. I smiled. "Sorry I'm late," I said as I approached the table. I heard Mrs. Turner had a seat reserved. The laughter around the table was polite, oblivious. Chris's wasn't. His face drained of color, his hand frozen halfway to his wine glass. I took my seat beside him, feeling the tension ripple beneath the chatter. The waiter poured champagne. His boss cracked a joke. I played my part, gracious, elegant, charming. But under the table, my hand rested on the small remote in my clutch. Every lie has a moment when it stops working. His would end tonight. Dinner unfolded like a play I'd already memorized. Chris kept his smile fixed, his laugh too high, his eyes darting between me and the screen across the room where the restaurant sometimes projected cityscapes. The air was thick with perfume, steak sauce, and unspoken panic. I raised my glass and joined the small talk about travel, investments, the weather, as if I hadn't been betrayed in this very building of polite smiles and polished shoes. Revenge doesn't need noise. It just needs timing. When the waiter brought the dessert tray, I stood. My voice carried easily over the clinking glasses and muted jazz. Before dessert, I began, smiling, I'd like to thank my husband for representing us so well, even when I'm not around. A few people chuckled, unsure if it was a joke. Chris's face tightened. My thumb pressed the remote. The room dimmed, and the screen behind us flickered to life. There they were, Chris and Olivia, the same restaurant, same corner table, his hand on hers, their faces too close for colleagues. The photos were clear, time-stamped, undeniable. A ripple of gasps spread through the room. Chris shot up, his voice breaking through the silence. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" I looked at him, calm, deliberate, unshaken. "Finishing your story," I said. I just thought everyone deserved to know the plot. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Forks hovered midair. His boss blinked, unsure whether to speak or disappear. The room felt suddenly smaller, every whisper amplified. Chris reached for me, his voice cracking. "Evelyn, please." But I stepped back, out of his reach, out of the role I'd played for too long. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You let another woman wear my name, Chris. I'm just returning the favor, in public." I picked up my glass, lifted it slightly. "To honesty," I said, before setting it down untouched. The sound of the stem hitting marble was sharp, final. I turned and walked toward the exit, each step echoing like punctuation marks to the life I was leaving behind. People whispered my name as I passed. Some looked away. Others stared, wide-eyed, unsure whether to pity or applaud me. I didn't care. I'd written my ending exactly as he deserved. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin, a shock after the thick heat of that room. For the first time in months, I could breathe. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stood under the city lights, calm and whole, as if the truth had scrubbed me clean. Behind me, the noise of confusion swelled, but it no longer belonged to me. That mess was his. Mine was clarity, sharp, shining, and finally, mine again. He came home past midnight. I heard the door slam before I saw him. The sound was loud, desperate, the kind of noise people make when they've lost control. I was sitting at the kitchen counter, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. He stormed in, red-faced, tie loose, voice raised. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, the way one looks at a stranger who's made too much noise in a quiet place. "No," I said softly. "You did that the moment you introduced your girlfriend as your wife." His mouth opened, then closed again. For once, he didn't have a script. "We can fix this," he said finally, reaching for me. His hand stopped midair when he saw my expression. Calm, detached, final. "You can explain it to HR," I said. "I already sent your boss the photos, and the security logs showing she used my name to get in." Watching the color drain from his face was almost peaceful. He stared at me, speechless, like the ground had shifted beneath him. Maybe it had. Maybe I'd just stopped holding it steady for him. I stood, placing my cup gently in the sink, letting the silence stretch. "I loved you enough to share my name," I told him. "You loved her enough to let her steal it." The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. He didn't follow me when I walked upstairs. I don't think he could. That night, for the first time in years, I slept soundly. Not because I forgave him, but because I no longer cared to. The morning light felt different, softer somehow, like the world had exhaled overnight. Chris didn't come down for breakfast, and I didn't go looking for him. I sat by the window, sipping coffee, watching the steam curl into the air like a ghost leaving the room. The house felt both empty and alive, stripped of lies, filled with silence that finally belonged to me. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger takes energy, and I was done giving him mine. His suitcase appeared by the door before noon. He said nothing when he came down, just looked at me, eyes sunken, voice gone. For the first time, I saw him without the confidence, without the charm, without the mask, just a man facing the ruins of his own choices. "You're not even going to talk to me?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, steady, unflinching. "I already did," I said. "You just weren't listening." He nodded once, defeated. The sound of the door closing behind him was softer than I expected. Not a slam, not an ending, just a quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted permanently. I sat there for a long time, watching sunlight creep across the floorboards, warming everything it touched. Maybe that's what healing felt like. Slow, quiet, and completely mine. The days that followed were quiet, beautifully, eerily quiet. I stopped checking my phone, stopped rehearsing what I'd say if he called. The truth was, I didn't need to say anything else. My silence spoke louder than every apology he never gave. Friends tried to ask what happened, but I only smiled. There's a kind of dignity in keeping certain stories for yourself, especially the ones that nearly broke you. I'd given enough of my life to explaining him. Now I was done. I started walking every morning just to feel the air on my skin. The world looked new in small ways, colors sharper, sounds clearer. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in shop windows and barely recognize the woman staring back. She looked stronger, lighter, free. One afternoon, I passed a florist and bought myself a single white rose, something I hadn't done in years. I didn't even know why. Maybe it was just proof that I could still choose beauty, even after chaos. Every night, I slept with the windows open. The breeze carried the city's hum, and for the first time in forever, it didn't make me feel lonely. I'd built my peace from the wreckage he left behind, not revenge anymore, reclamation. And deep down, I knew I'd never be the same woman who walked into that office with Thai food and good intentions. That version of me was gone. What remained was stronger, sharper, and finally awake. Months later, I signed the divorce papers in a sunlit office overlooking the city. The pen felt lighter than I expected, like it wasn't ending something, but setting it free. Chris had already been demoted, his reputation in shambles, his name whispered in hallways the way people whisper about ghosts. I didn't need to see him to know he'd finally learned what silence feels like when it's turned against you. The woman who once hid behind his shadow was gone. I'd outgrown that space completely. My life didn't explode into something new. It unfolded quietly, gracefully. A new job, a new rhythm, a version of peace I'd built myself. The office lobby where I now worked smelled faintly of coffee and ambition. My kind of perfume. I walked through those glass doors every morning, not as his wife, not as Mrs. Turner, but as Evelyn, whole, untangled, unborrowed. The kind of woman who could look at her reflection and see no trace of apology. One afternoon at lunch, my phone buzzed. A message from an unfamiliar number. "I'm so sorry for what I said that day." Sophie, the intern, the girl who had accidentally changed everything. I smiled, typing back, "Don't be. You just opened my eyes." I slipped the phone into my bag and looked out the window at the city below, bright, indifferent, alive. Some stories don't need revenge to end. They just need truth. When I left the cafe that day, the air felt different, lighter, as if the universe had finally exhaled. I walked through the crowd, no longer shrinking to make space for someone else's story. I wasn't the betrayed wife anymore. I was the woman who survived it, who turned humiliation into something almost artful. People talk about revenge like it's a single moment, a grand explosion. But it isn't. It's the quiet satisfaction of rebuilding your life so beautifully that the person who broke it can't recognize what they lost. At work, my new team respected me, not because of a title or a name, but because of how I carried myself now, grounded, unshakable. Sometimes I'd catch someone glancing at my left hand, where a ring used to sit, and I'd smile faintly. That small, empty space didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like freedom, a reminder that I'd once belonged to someone who couldn't value what he had. And now, I belonged entirely to myself. Later that evening, as I walked home, the city lights reflected off the pavement like tiny mirrors. For the first time in a long while, I didn't look back. The past wasn't chasing me anymore. It was behind glass, like an exhibit of who I used to be. He made a fool of me once, yes, but I'd made sure the world saw who the real fool was. And in the end, that truth was worth more than any apology he could ever offer. The following weekend, I took myself to the coast. No plans, no one waiting on the other end of a message. Just me, the wind, and the sound of waves breaking like a metronome for a new life. I walked along the shore barefoot, the water cold and alive around my ankles. Every step felt lighter, like I was finally walking out of the wreckage barefoot but unburned. People always say healing looks soft. They're wrong. It's fierce. It's quiet fire. I sat on a rock, watching the horizon blur into gold, and thought about everything I'd carried and everything I'd put down. I wasn't angry anymore. I was aware. Aware of how easy it is to lose yourself when love becomes habit, and how powerful it feels when you finally choose yourself over history. I closed my eyes, breathing in salt and freedom, knowing the chapter wasn't revenge anymore. It was reclamation. When I finally stood to leave, I whispered it. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for me. He let another woman wear my name, I said under the wind. So I took it back, along with my pride. The waves carried the words away, folding them into the sea's endless rhythm. And for the first time since Sophie's innocent slip, I felt it completely. Not victory, not vindication, but peace. The kind that doesn't ask permission to stay.